All right, well, welcome, Samir. It's so good to see you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
It's delightful. So you have such an interesting career, and I would love to have you introduce yourself, where you work, and what you do.
Sure. My name is Samir Jabber. I am a laboratory animal veterinarian. I work for a biopharmaceutical company called AbbVie. I'm based out of Massachusetts. And I got here through kind of a circuitous route in that I thought I was going to be a dog and cat private practice veterinarian from the time I was very young. I knew that there was kind of a calling for me to work with animals, and over time I kind of worked towards putting together kind of a resume and experiences that allowed me to eventually get into veterinary school. Which can be quite competitive sometimes. I did dabble in the private practice arena. I was an emergency room private practice vet in both New York City and then the suburban Philadelphia area. And then over time, I did a little bit of career and personal evaluation. I found a career option in working in a research setting, which I thought was very fulfilling. And amenable to the lifestyle that I was kind of building for myself. And so I, out of veterinary school, out of my private practice time, I went back to do a postdoctoral training in the form of a residency program. I did that at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and have been since then a full-time laboratory animal veterinarian, first in an academic setting and now in industry.
So I have to admit to you that there are so many people who join us who have career conversations, and many of them will say, I always thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, and then they would go on to say, I didn't get into vet school, or I was, not prepared, or I found this other career path. We have yet to welcome a real veterinarian, and it's just so amazing that you can go through that veterinary path to get to what is a really satisfying and interesting career in biotechnology and biopharmaceuticals. So thank you for leading the way in the path on that. And congratulations on coming through the veterinary path. It is a very hard path for sure.
Thank you.
But I also think it's probably surprising to people that veterinary medicine and veterinarians are needed as part of biopharma. So maybe can you talk about the company you're with and what you do with them?
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, maybe before I jump too deep into that, just a background on laboratory animal medicine as a veterinary path. It's interesting because I think it is classified by some people as a non-traditional route for a veterinarian to go. But the AVMA, the American Veterinary Medical Association, which is the group that kind of does the accreditation of institutions that do board certification for veterinarians. In that group, I don't remember the exact number, but there are dozens of veterinary specialties. And actually, laboratory animal medicine is the third oldest of those after preventative medicine and pathology, based on work that was needed for kind of more specialized knowledge in the veterinary field. Most of what I do is not something I learned in veterinary school. There's very few classes on the species that we commonly use, which in my case is mostly mice and rats. And so even though it's thought of as this non-traditional route, it really is, there's a good history of veterinarians going into research support functions. To come back to what you were saying, the company I work for, AbbVie, is a global biopharmaceutical company. We're interested in discovering and then producing drugs that really can help make an impact in people's lives. The route to go from that idea of helping patients and figuring out what's wrong to being able to address it is a long one, and involves many different kind of subspecialties of science, all the way from chemistry to human clinical medicine, of course. And in the middle of that somewhere is where I come in, or at least, my function. And so what happens is somebody has an idea that a specific target might be amenable to drugability, right? There's something that is out there that a medicine can engage with, and then the after effect of that would be a benefit to the patient in terms of less clinical signs, or obviously the ideal is a cure, right? And so, the process starts out by finding the molecules, whether they are what's called small molecules, or large molecules like antibodies and other biological products. And then they run, many of these compounds through batteries of tests in computer modeling, in petri dishes, and all kinds of things. Where the veterinarians come in is that there is still a lot of those models, although they're great, don't recapitulate the whole picture of a living organism, right? So there's lots that the people that are making those very complicated and sophisticated models still don't know about how this system works in a whole animal. And in those cases, we have to use whole animals to answer certain scientific questions, specifically about how effective or safe any individual medication or drug candidate might be.
Right.
And so we have a facility of that. The veterinarians are in charge of overseeing the health and well-being of those animals. Also, we participate in the ethical review of these things. So there are certain standards that we, have to abide by and are ethically obligated to abide by. And so it's part of my team's job to make sure that they're well taken care of. And of course, this is, our mantra is animal welfare is good science. Animals housed in conditions that aren't suitable to their welfare, that's a variable that we try to control for. Just like in lots of scientific experiments, there's lots of variables that we can't control, and so we do our best to do as much control as possible. So that's kind of the 30,000 foot view of what it is to be a lab animal vet. And there are many of us around. Like I said in the beginning, and I came through an academic route, so many medical schools, a lot of NIH-funded research organizations are both required by regulation to have a veterinarian, but also some of them find more value in it than just that and hire extra ones.
Yeah.
And so that's true in academics, in industry, and in government jobs, for example, at the NIH and the CDC, et cetera.
So it sounds great. It sounds like, you're getting to work with animals, which is your training and your passion, and then also adding to the global good through development of good medicines. It also sounds like you have a team. So tell me a little bit about, like your day to day, you interact with others. It's not just with the animals, right?
Yeah. And actually, at the stage in my career where I am, I do more interacting with people than with animals. And so, on the team, it's a very diverse team that, includes multiple people, including the care technicians, the animal care technicians that are doing kind of the on the ground in facility, really, really necessary, important foundational work of animal husbandry, making sure everybody is fed and watered and healthy, on clean bedding, and all of this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of labor that goes into that. There are groups that certify technicians for different skill sets. The American Association for Laboratory Animal Science is kind of the big industry leader in this, and so those technicians can do fairly complicated things, including kind of administration of some of the substances. If they have to have an oral medication, the technicians that go and do the oral dosing and that kind of thing. On the other side of that, we'd like to get things from the animals, the data from the animals. That can be by things like tissue collection, clinical and behavioral observations, and those kinds of things. Again, the technicians are doing most of that. We run a pretty sophisticated, complicated facility, so we need some experts in facility engineering and maintenance to make sure our HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems are all appropriate. Having a fair number of animals, we have to make sure they all have clean water that is beyond the quality standards of most municipal taps. And so, we have to have people that are, even though their functions are in support of the animal facility, they might not be the animal hands-on experts, but they have expertise in other things, facilities, maintenance, engineering, that kind of thing. We also have, as I mentioned, there's administrative work to do in terms of regulatory paperwork. We have new scientists starting all the time. And so we have a training program on how to teach people that might be new to doing what we call in vivo or in life work with animals on what are the appropriate ways and more successful ways of handling animals to get the work that needs to be done. I also do some scientific consultation for people that are doing projects. I do have a medical background in veterinary medicine, so it's helpful to bring that to the table. It's a nice holistic view of a full animal, whereas somebody doing an experiment might be very well versed, much more than myself in a specific biological subspecialty like immunology or something. Right. But having the full idea of how do I translate into an animal experiment. So we help with those kinds of things. And the team is big enough that there's supervisors, there's the veterinary technicians that execute kind of prescribed medications by me, just like in the clinic. And so it's a pretty broad, diverse group.
It seems, and highly functioning. It is incredible the number of interdisciplinary pieces that have to come together to have a real functioning, department like what you are working in. And it also sounds like there are multiple points of entry that you can go as far as veterinary or medical degrees or scientific PhDs. There are also places that require less of a terminal degree, less educational attainment to actually find a satisfying career.
Yeah, and I think that is a great thing to point out. It's something that it's not totally unique, but I would say rare in or at least in the research and development side of the pharmaceutical business, is that there are definitely roles where people can have a foot in the door, so to speak, without a college degree, and then build up experience to the point where they can. I mentioned some of those industry certifications. Those are all on-the-job learning opportunities, and then eventually, good candidates can go into a supervisory role, eventually a facility manager, and work your way up the ranks in a way that is more difficult to do in other kind of more traditional scientific route paths.
Yeah. I think it's great. The more points of entry that we can have with different levels of educational attainment, the more people who can be involved in what is such an important area and such an important field. So, because I'm curious about it, did you come from a family of veterinarians, medical people, scientists? Were you farmers? Like what led you to the connection of
so it's a good question. So I'm a child of immigrants. Nobody in my family had a college degree before I went to school. So there's not a long history of that, certainly not of veterinary medicine. My mother is a registered nurse. This was when they did that before a bachelor's degree was kind of the standard. So she, despite being an RN, she does not have that BSN, bachelor's degree. So I'm the first person to go to a four-year college and then graduate. And then I didn't stop there. The doctorate in veterinary medicine is a four-year additional on top of that. And so there's not a big background in my family. This is something that I kind of grew into because of personal interest. And then once I kind of got in, I was all in. And there were definitely times in my career, as I mentioned, that I didn't know what kind of veterinarian I wanted to be. And you go through the kind of the whole gamut of things, right? Working for a zoo would be really interesting. Is that a path that works for me? Horses are beautiful animals, but could I work on a horse farm? Not having background. I never touched a horse before veterinary school, for example. Veterinary medicine itself is very broad. But what kind of drew me into this laboratory animal medicine piece was really that even though it is a specialty, it is one of the broadest specialties, because within laboratory animal medicine, you could be involved in infectious disease work, surgery, anesthesia, pain management, immunology, dermatology. There's all kinds of things. So it allowed me to be a specialist without having to really dedicate to a specific, clinical disease spectrum or biological system like the integrity.
It's, well, I mean, it sounds, the way you present it makes it sound like you've been sort of fortunate and lucky to have backed in or happenstanced into a field that is so fascinating and so perfect for you. But I'm going to suspect that there are people along the way that gave you advice, or that people who helped guide you in those decisions. And, a number of the people who watch these videos or are thinking about it are trying to identify the important levers for helping them, move into a career that's meaningful and into a educational experience that's meaningful. So I guess as maybe a last question, are there experiences like that you think are important to landing you where you were or where you are?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say in my personal story, I did not apply to veterinary school right out of undergrad because having the reputation for being very competitive and having just slightly above average GPA, I was a little bit nervous about being rejected the first time around. So I actually joined a laboratory group that is a larger version of the type of department that I now oversee for AbbVie. This was at a large medical school in the Midwest. I entered as a animal care technician myself, so I do know all of the workings of what does a day of working at a mouse facility look like on the ground, day in and day out. And I guess the piece of advice I would have is, don't keep your aspirations quiet. And so what happened to me in that position is I mentioned to some of the veterinarians that I was interested in going to veterinary school, and they kind of just took me under their wing. One specifically, it was like, if you can get all your work done and you have some free time, come hang out with me. And I just remember she was involved in an imaging project where they were ultrasound imaging mouse thyroid tumors. Now, I don't know if you have a concept of the size of a mouse thyroid, but mice are pretty small organisms, right? They're about 30 grams a piece. And so their thyroids are very small. So looking at their small nodules on that thyroid with an imaging device requires pretty fancy equipment. So, it took her in. I just was amazed by kind of the cutting edge nature of the thing that she was doing. And I thought, I'm going to keep this in my back pocket for after I get out of veterinary school as a possible career path, because it is really engaging. You are on the cutting edge. And, another piece of it is, you take an oath when you get into veterinary school about what you're going to do. And people don't realize that the oath that you take is, I'm going to use my scientific knowledge and skills for the benefit of society. That's the opening of it. Of course, it is through the protection of animal resources and animal welfare and those things. But so I thought the laboratory animal field really fell into this. And without voicing that to somebody else who kind of took me in, I think, there would have been a lost opportunity there. So I would say my big piece of advice is, broadcast your interest, because somebody hopefully will catch on to that. And I, despite how loquacious I can be, sometimes I'm fairly quiet and shy and introverted in my personal life. And so I know that there are challenges to getting up and over those things, but it will be worthwhile. And with practice, those, speaking up and not being kind of embarrassed, they get easier, I promise.
What a great piece of advice. I think that is so true, that when you put those ambitions out into the world, it does take bravery and it does take like a muscle. You have to build that muscle up. But yes, there are people who really are eager to just support and move that forward, because we've all been helped, right? Not one of us got to where we are without somebody helping us realize our own ambitions. So
Absolutely.
what a great piece of advice. Thank you so much for sharing your really interesting career path. It's just been a joy to hear. You clearly love what you do. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for having me to share it. Yeah.